The fluorescent lights in the ER flickered as doctors rushed between gurneys. My younger brother lay on one bed, me on another, both battered and bleeding after the crash. I fought to stay conscious, clinging to the sound of my father's voice. Then I heard it, clear, cold, and deliberate. "Don't save him. Save my favorite child instead." His words weren't a slip. They were a verdict. And in that moment, I realized I had been expendable all along. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old, a high school English teacher, and for most of my life I've worn the quiet label of the other son. I grew up in a modest two-story house in a small Ohio town, tucked between soybean fields and a rusting rail line. My parents, Dad, a construction foreman with calloused hands, and Mom, a nurse who often worked double shifts, raised two boys. I was the firstborn, steady and bookish. My younger brother Ryan came along 4 years later, loud and radiant, the kind of child who seemed to glow in every photograph. From the very beginning, the comparisons started. When I brought home B's and the occasional A in elementary school, my father would frown and ask why I couldn't be more like Ryan, though Ryan was still in kindergarten waving finger paintings like masterpieces. At Little League, my dad's cheers would shake the bleachers when Ryan hit a ball, but when I struck out, his silence pressed harder than any jeer. Mom tried to balance things, but even she fell into the rhythm of Dad's favoritism. She'd remind me, "You're the dependable one, Ethan. Your brother just needs more attention, dependable." It was the kind of word that sounded like praise but felt like a chain. By high school, Ryan was the golden boy. Star quarterback, prom king, the kind of kid who got his name in the local paper every other week. Meanwhile, I was the editor of the school literary magazine, a title no one in my family mentioned at the dinner table. Dad never missed a single one of Ryan's football games, but I can't remember him attending a single debate competition or open mic where I read my poems. College didn't change much. I chose teaching, steady, respectable, but not glamorous. Ryan dropped out of college after a year, but somehow even his failures became family anecdotes told with a chuckle. "That's just Ryan," Dad would say, pride still dripping from his voice. Through it all, I learned to swallow my resentment. I told myself it was enough to build my own quiet life, to love literature, to care for my students, to be the one who showed up when the family needed errands run or bills explained. I told myself that love in a family doesn't need to be equal to still be real. But deep down, a part of me wondered, if a moment ever came when my father had to choose, where would I stand? I didn't expect the answer to arrive in a hospital with blood seeping through my shirt and my life hanging by a thread. The accident itself was a blur of twisted metal and shattered glass. Ryan had been driving. Of course he was. Dad had tossed him the keys to the truck earlier that day, even though Ryan had been drinking at the barbecue. I'd offered to drive. "You're too cautious," Dad had said with a smirk, as if responsibility were a flaw. Now, lying in that hospital bed, I replayed it all in fragments. The squeal of tires, the sickening crunch when we clipped the guardrail, Ryan cursing under his breath as the airbags exploded, the world spinning, then going dark. Through the haze of pain and medication, I kept circling back to my father's voice. "Don't save him. Save my favorite child instead." It should have been the shock talking. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe adrenaline warped my memory. But the more I tried to convince myself, the clearer it rang in my ears. There had been no hesitation in his tone. No panic. Just a cold calculation, the same kind of certainty he used when ordering supplies for a job site. I remembered other moments, smaller ones that I'd buried. When I got pneumonia at 16 and Mom rushed me to the ER, Dad had stayed home because Ryan had a scrimmage the next morning. When I earned my teaching certification, Dad didn't show up to the ceremony. He was busy helping Ryan move into yet another apartment after quitting yet another job. Even at family dinners, the imbalance showed. Ryan's stories, no matter how trivial, dominated the table while mine evaporated mid-sentence. If I tried to talk about a favorite book or a student I was proud of, Dad would interrupt with, "Hey, Ryan, tell them about that time you..." A pattern had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it for what it was. Now, lying bruised and broken, I couldn't escape it. The suspicion hardened into a cruel clarity. My father had said out loud what he'd always shown in quieter ways. Ryan was his pride. I was his afterthought. The fourth beeped beside me, steady and impersonal. I clenched my teeth, trying not to let the tears come. Because if I let them, I knew I'd unravel completely. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just jealous of Ryan, I was scared. Scared that if the doctors had truly listened, my life would have ended on that sterile table, not because of the accident, but because my father had finally spoken his truth. The days that followed felt like being trapped in a loop of half-truths and uneasy silences. My ribs ached with every breath, but the sharper pain came from Dad's voice replaying in my head. Don't save him. Save my favorite child instead. It echoed louder than the monitors that kept track of my pulse. Visitors trickled into my hospital room. Mom sat at my bedside for hours, brushing my hair back like she used to when I was little. She whispered, "You're safe." That's what matters. Yet she never once addressed what I'd overheard. I wanted to ask her outright, but fear kept my lips sealed. Fear that she might confirm it, or worse, that she'd already known all along. Ryan came too, arm in a sling, bruises speckling his jaw. He leaned against the wall, telling jokes about how the truck was basically firewood now, and how Dad was already shopping for another one. I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. Not once did he ask how I was holding up. It was as if my survival was incidental while his scratches were worthy of center stage. Then Dad arrived. He didn't bring flowers or even his usual gruff pat on the shoulder. He just stood there, arms crossed, looking at me like I was an obstacle rather than his child. "You're tougher than you look," he said, voice flat. "Doctor said you'll walk out of here in a week." Good thing. Ryan needs help covering rent until he's back at work. That was it. No apology for letting Ryan drive drunk. No acknowledgement of what I might have heard. Just another reminder of my role. Patch the holes Ryan left behind. And my mind kept drifting back to the long history of similar moments, every cut a little deeper than the last. When Ryan totaled his first car, Dad tapped my savings account, without asking, to help buy him another one. "He needs it more than you do," Dad had explained, as if my college tuition weren't looming. When Ryan flunked out of his first semester, Dad framed it as a gap year, then pressured me into tutoring him. Meanwhile, when I earned a scholarship, the celebration amounted to a handshake and, "Don't let it make you cocky." Even birthdays became proof of hierarchy. Ryan's 21st had a rented hall, a cake shaped like a football, and a guest list that included half the neighborhood. Mine? A card slipped across the dinner table, Dad already talking about Ryan's next job prospect. Now, lying in a hospital bed, I saw those incidents not as isolated slights, but as the foundation of something much darker. Dad's loyalty wasn't just skewed, it was absolute. Enough to gamble with my life when it came down to choosing. That thought burrowed deep. Because if a parent can decide, without hesitation, that one child matters more than another, what did that make me in this family? A placeholder? An insurance policy? The beeping monitor kept time as the realization sank in. My father hadn't simply neglected me over the years. He had erased me. 3 nights after the accident, sleep still came in shallow bursts. I woke often to the sound of carts rolling down the corridor, or the low hum of the oxygen machine beside me. Around midnight, I stirred at the sound of voices just outside my half-open door. At first I thought it was the nurses, but then I recognized Dad's tone. Low, clipped, the way he spoke when trying to sound practical, but really just bulldozing everyone else. "If there's another complication, we prioritize Ryan," he said. My pulse monitor spiked. I froze, straining to hear every word. The doctor responded carefully. "Mr. Caldwell, both your sons deserve equal care. Our duty is to every patient." Dad's voice sharpened, dismissive. "I get that. But Ryan's the one with prospects. He's got the career, the family name to carry on. He can't be replaced. My other son, he'll manage somehow. He always does. The words hit harder than the crash itself. Replaceable. That was me. Even after hearing him once before, some part of me had still hoped I'd misinterpreted. But this time there was no ambiguity. He was lobbying a doctor, my doctor, to see me as expendable. I wanted to rip the IV out and storm into the hall, but I stayed still, every muscle taut. The betrayal felt radioactive, burning under my skin. Mom's voice cut in then, softer but no less devastating. "John, please." "Don't talk like that. He's our son too," Dad scoffed. "He's strong enough? He'll survive. But Ryan? Ryan's special. You know it as well as I do, Silence. No rebuttal, no defense. Just quiet, heavy, complicity." The footsteps eventually faded, but the damage was permanent. I lay staring at the ceiling tiles, each square a reminder that my life, in Dad's eyes, was negotiable. Not just overlooked, but second tier by design. And suddenly, a montage of buried memories clicked into brutal clarity. When I was 12 and broke my wrist at baseball practice, Dad brushed it off as clumsiness, barely looking up from Ryan's game schedule. When I brought home an art award in high school, Mom clapped politely, but then rushed to remind everyone Ryan had scored 2 touchdowns the same week. Every dismissal, every minimization, every quiet moment where I told myself maybe next time they'll notice, they all funneled into this one revelation. They never would. Because Dad had already chosen, and Mom, by silence, had endorsed it. I realized then that the accident hadn't just nearly killed me. It had exposed the truth I'd been too afraid to name. In this family, my existence was conditional. My survival was optional. The monitor beeped steadily beside me, a cruel reminder that my body was still fighting for me even when my father wouldn't. And in that sterile, sleepless room, I made a silent promise. The next chapter of my life would not be dictated by someone who saw me as disposable. The morning after overhearing Dad, the hospital felt colder. Same sterile walls, same hum of machinery, but the air around me carried a new weight. When the nurse came in to check my vitals, I forced a smile. She was the only person whose presence didn't feel like a performance. She didn't know about favoritism, family politics, or who was worth saving. She only saw a patient. But when visiting hours began, the charade returned. Mom walked in carrying a basket of fruit. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine as she set it on the bedside table. "You need to keep your strength up," she murmured. I studied her face, searching for some crack, some sign she regretted standing silent last night. Nothing. Just the same practiced softness she'd worn my whole life. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Not much," I said flatly. "It's hard when you hear your dad argue that your life isn't worth saving." Her head snapped up, lips parting in shock. Color drained from her cheeks. She hadn't realized I'd heard. You weren't supposed to," she stammered. "But I did." My voice was calm, too calm. "And you didn't say anything." "You let him say it." She gripped the chair by my bed like it might steady her. "It wasn't the time to argue. You don't understand how he gets—" "Stop!" My throat tightened. "I don't want excuses. I just wanted to know if you'd fight for me. Now I know." The silence between us was deafening. Eventually she sat, but her presence felt like absence. Later that day, Ryan stopped by, his arm in a sling but otherwise looking annoyingly heroic. The golden child, perfectly bruised for sympathy. He leaned against the wall, awkward for once. "Hey," he said, as though nothing earth-shattering had happened. "They're saying I might get discharged in a few days." "Good for you," I muttered. He shifted, uneasy. "Listen, I don't control what Dad says." "You know how he is, do I?" I asked, turning my head toward him. "Because you've always been the reason behind how he is. Everything's about keeping you on the pedestal." Ryan's mouth opened, then shut again. He looked like he wanted to defend himself but couldn't find the words. In the end, he just said, "I didn't ask for it. That doesn't make it hurt less, I whispered. He left soon after, relief flashing across his face like he couldn't wait to escape my room. By the time evening fell, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Nurses checked in, machines beeped. My family floated in and out, orbiting me without truly seeing me. I scrolled through my phone, staring at names I could call, friends, coworkers, but didn't. The exhaustion was bone deep, not just from broken ribs or bruised lungs, but from years of carrying the invisible weight of being second best. That night, lying in the dim hospital glow, I realized I was more alone than I'd ever been. Not because no one was around, but because the people who were supposed to love me most had already decided I wasn't worth saving. Dad came into my room the next morning with the same commanding presence he always carried. Like the walls should straighten up when he walked in. He shut the door behind him, placed his hands on his hips, and looked at me as though I were a faulty engine part he wasn't sure was worth replacing. "You're looking better," he said finally. "That's good. We need you back on your feet." I studied his face. No guilt, no apology, just expectation. "Back on my feet for what?" I asked. "To carry Ryan's bags? To clean up the messes no one else wants?" His jaw tightened. "Don't start. We just survived an accident that could have killed us all. This isn't the time for dramatics." I let out a humorless laugh. "Dramatics? I heard you, Dad. Last night. You told the doctor to save Ryan over me." The words landed like a slap. His eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he steeled himself. "You weren't supposed to hear that." "But I did. And I'll never forget it." He exhaled sharply, pacing once by the foot of my bed. "Look, I said what I thought was practical. Ryan has more ahead of him. He's stronger. He's the one who—" He trailed off as if realizing the truth of what he was admitting. "The one who's worth more?" I finished for him. Silence. Only the monitor by my bed filled the room with its steady beep. I felt the anger rising, but beneath it was something heavier. Clarity. For years, I'd been chasing crumbs of approval, thinking if I just worked harder, if I stayed quiet, if I made fewer mistakes, maybe I'd finally be enough. Last night proved it would never matter. So I spoke carefully, each word like laying bricks in a wall I should have built long ago. "I'm done, Dad. Done trying to earn a place in a family that decided my worth before I was old enough to argue. You don't have to say it out loud again. I already know what you choose. And I'm choosing too." He narrowed his eyes. "Choosing what?" "Choosing me. Choosing to stop being your backup plan. Choosing to walk away." Dad scoffed as if the idea were laughable. "Walk away? You're overreacting. Blood is blood." "Blood," I said quietly, "doesn't excuse betrayal. You made it clear who you'd save. I'll make it clear who I won't keep sacrificing myself for." The words hung between us, heavier than any shout. For the first time in my life, I saw something crack in his armor. Not regret, at least not yet, but uncertainty. The realization that I wasn't bluffing. I leaned back against the pillow, suddenly calm. "You don't have to pick between us anymore, Dad. Because I won't be standing in line waiting for scraps of love. Not again." He opened his mouth, then shut it. The silence stretched until he finally muttered, "You'll regret this," and walked out. But as the door clicked shut, I knew he was wrong. For the first time, I felt like I'd stopped begging for my life and started living it on my own terms. Recovery wasn't fast, but it was steady. A month after the accident, the doctors cleared me to go home, though home didn't feel like the right word anymore. I packed my things quietly, signed my own discharge papers, and didn't bother waiting for Dad or Ryan to offer me a ride. Instead, a friend from college picked me up, someone who'd stayed in my corner even when my family hadn't. For a while, I kept expecting an apology. A phone call, a text, maybe even a half-hearted attempt from Mom to smooth things over. What I got instead were reminders. Reminders that Ryan was doing well, that Dad was under a lot of stress and that I shouldn't hold on to anger. Not once did anyone say the words I needed to hear. We're sorry. We chose wrong. So I made my own choice. I found a small apartment 2 towns over, nothing fancy, just a 1 bedroom with thin walls and a leaky faucet in the kitchen. But it was mine. Every paycheck I earned went into building something I could call my own. A place no one else could take credit for. A life no one could rank against a favorite child. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd get calls from relatives asking when I'd visit or why I missed Sunday dinners. I'd keep my answers short. I'm busy, I'm working, I can't make it. Eventually, they stopped asking. The silence was painful at first, then freeing. A year passed. By then, I had switched jobs, moving from late-night shifts at the hardware store to a full-time role in logistics at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me stability, benefits, and a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to someone else's shadow. Meanwhile, word trickled through the grapevine about my family. Ryan's life, once so golden, was unraveling. He'd lost his job after showing up drunk one too many times. Dad had covered for him, of course, draining savings to keep Ryan's mortgage afloat. But money only stretches so far. Their house was in foreclosure now, and Dad's favorite child was living back under his roof. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated even, but instead all I felt was distance, like I was watching a storm through a window from another world. Their chaos no longer belonged to me. One evening, as I sat on my tiny balcony sipping cheap coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Dad, for the first time in months. I let it go to voicemail. Later, curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. His voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. "Son, things have been hard here. I know I wasn't fair to you. I know I said things I shouldn't have. Ryan's not doing well. We could use your help." I deleted the message because here's the truth. I had already given them enough. Years of effort, patience, silence, and sacrifice. And when it came down to the wire, when life and death were in the balance, Dad showed me exactly what my worth was in his eyes. So no, I wouldn't be the safety net this time. I looked out at the evening traffic, the city lights flickering on one by one. For once, my heart felt steady. Not empty, not bitter, just resolved. Sometimes dignity isn't about shouting louder, proving yourself harder, or exacting some grand revenge. Sometimes it's about stepping back, closing the door, and knowing you've finally stopped asking people to love you the way they never could. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal. He chose his favorite. I chose myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough.